The weapon the United States just deployed in Iran is not what you think. It is not a stealth bomber. It is not a hypersonic missile. It is not even a fighter jet. What just arrived in the Persian Gulf region is something Iran has spent decades preparing to counter, and yet when it finally showed up, Tehran's entire defensive doctrine became obsolete in a matter of hours. By the time we are done, you will understand why Iran's military planners are scrambling to rewrite strategies they have relied on since the 1980s. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we are tracking developments in the Middle East that are fundamentally reshaping the balance of power in ways mainstream coverage is not telling you. I am going to show you exactly what the United States just introduced into the Iranian theater, why this changes the strategic calculus for Tehran in ways that go far beyond a single weapon system, and what this means for the future of deterrence in the most volatile region on Earth. We will cover the technical capabilities that make this deployment unprecedented, the strategic doctrine it enables that Iran cannot effectively counter, and the second-order effects on regional alliances that are already forcing countries to recalculate their positions. By the end, you will understand why this single deployment represents a bigger shift in Middle Eastern power dynamics than anything we have seen since Operation Desert Storm. To understand why this deployment matters, you need to understand what Iran has been building for the past 40 years. Since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran has constructed one of the most sophisticated defensive networks in the world. Not the most technologically advanced, but one of the most layered and redundant. This is not accidental. Iran learned lessons from Iraq in the 1980s, from watching the United States dismantle Saddam Hussein's military in 1991, and from observing NATO operations in Serbia in 1999. The lesson Iran absorbed was simple. You cannot beat the United States in conventional warfare, so you do not try. Instead, you make yourself too expensive to attack. Iran's defensive strategy rests on three pillars. First, hardened underground facilities. Iran has spent billions of dollars burying its most critical military and nuclear infrastructure deep beneath mountains. These are not simple bunkers. These are reinforced concrete structures buried under hundreds of feet of solid rock, designed specifically to survive the bunker-busting munitions the United States possessed in the 1990s and early 2000s. Second, integrated air defense networks. Iran operates a patchwork of Russian S-300 systems, domestically produced Bavar 373 systems, and older equipment dating back to the Shah era. These systems are designed to create overlapping coverage that makes penetration by conventional strike packages difficult and costly. Third, asymmetric capabilities. Proxy forces across the region, naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz, thousands of ballistic and cruise missiles, and swarms of unmanned aerial vehicles. The idea is to make any conflict with Iran not just militarily challenging but strategically unpalatable. For decades, this strategy worked. The United States had the capability to strike Iran, but the costs looked prohibitive. Destroying Iran's nuclear program would require penetrating those deep underground bunkers, which meant deploying significant air assets, accepting losses to air defenses, and potentially triggering a regional conflict that could close the Strait of Hormuz and spike global oil prices. Tehran banked on this calculation. They believed their defensive investments had created a buffer of deterrence that would prevent American military action, regardless of what provocations they engaged in. Then something changed. On March 23, 2026, the United States deployed the B-21 Raider to an undisclosed location within striking range of Iran. This is not a drill. This is not a training exercise. This is an operational deployment of the most advanced strategic bomber ever built, and it fundamentally breaks every assumption Iran's defensive doctrine rests on. Let me tell you what the B-21 Raider actually is, because this is not just another stealth aircraft. The B-21 is a sixth-generation strategic bomber developed by Northrop Grumman under a program so classified that the first public images were not released until November 2022. The official designation is B-21, where the 21 refers to it being designed for the 21st century battlefield. The nickname Raider honors the Doolittle Raiders from World War II. This aircraft represents a fundamental leap in stealth technology, sensor fusion, and long-range strike capability. The B-21 uses what is called next-generation stealth. Every previous stealth aircraft, including the B-2 Spirit and the F-35, was designed to evade radar systems from the 1980s and 1990s. Those systems operated primarily in specific radar frequency bands that stealth-shaping and radar-absorbing materials could effectively counter. But modern air defense networks, including those Russia and China have developed and exported, operate across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. They use lower frequency radars that can detect older stealth aircraft at extended ranges, even if they cannot achieve weapons quality tracking. The B-21 was designed from the ground up to defeat these modern integrated air defense systems. Its radar cross-section is orders of magnitude smaller than previous stealth platforms. We are talking about a bomber the size of a large commercial aircraft that appears on radar with the signature of something smaller than a bird. But stealth is only part of the equation. The B-21 is designed for what the Air Force calls open architecture. This means its systems can be rapidly updated with new sensors, new electronic warfare capabilities, and new weapons without requiring years of integration work. It can carry the entire range of American precision-guided munitions, including the weapons specifically designed to destroy the kind of deep underground facilities Iran relies on for protection. And its operational range exceeds 6,000 miles without refueling, which means it can strike anywhere in Iran from bases the Iranian military cannot effectively threaten. Here is what Iran is facing now. For the first time since their defensive strategy was conceived, they are looking at a platform they cannot reliably detect, cannot effectively track, and cannot confidently intercept. The S-300 systems they purchased from Russia were designed to counter aircraft like the B-52 or even the B-2. They were not designed to detect something with the radar signature of the B-21. The Bavar 373 systems Iran developed domestically are based on technology derived from older Russian designs. They suffer from the same limitations. Iran's integrated air defense network, which they spent decades building and refining, is effectively blind to this aircraft. Think about what that means for a moment. Iran's entire defensive posture rests on the assumption that they can detect incoming threats with enough warning to either intercept them or disperse valuable assets. The B-21 strips away that assumption. It can penetrate Iranian airspace, strike critical targets, and egress before Iranian air defenses even know it was there. This is not theoretical. The aircraft exists. It is operational. And it is now deployed within striking range of every critical Iranian facility. Now let us talk about what the B-21 can carry, because the airframe is only half the story. The weapon that makes this deployment genuinely transformative is the GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator. This is a precision-guided bunker-busting bomb weighing exactly 5,000 pounds. The previous generation bunker buster, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, weighs 30,000 pounds and can only be carried by the B-2 Spirit. The GBU-57 can penetrate approximately 200 feet of reinforced concrete or 60 feet of solid rock. It is an impressive weapon, but it has limitations. Its size means each B-2 can only carry a single munition, its weight requires specialized loading equipment, and its penetration depth, while substantial, is not sufficient to reach the deepest Iranian facilities. The GBU-72 represents a completely different approach. At 5,000 pounds, it is small enough that a single B-21 can carry multiple munitions in a single sortie. But here is where the technology gets interesting. The GBU-72 does not rely purely on kinetic energy to achieve penetration. It uses a two-stage warhead design. The first stage is a shaped charge that creates a penetration channel through the initial layers of protection. The second stage is a follow-through warhead that travels down that channel before detonating deep inside the structure. According to defense analysts who have reviewed the classified specifications, the GBU-72 can penetrate approximately 300 feet of reinforced concrete or penetrate hardened facilities buried under 150 feet of solid rock. That is a 50% improvement over the previous generation weapon in a package 1/6 the weight. What does this mean in practical terms? Iran's Fordo nuclear facility is buried approximately 300 feet beneath a mountain near Qom. This facility was specifically designed to be immune to American bunker-busting munitions. When it was constructed, it probably was immune. The GBU-57 could damage it, but likely could not destroy it completely. The GBU-72 changes that calculation. For the first time, the United States possesses a deliverable weapon that can reach and destroy Fordo, and an aircraft that can deliver that weapon without being detected by Iranian air defenses. But Fordo is just one target. Iran operates multiple underground facilities housing centrifuge cascades for uranium enrichment, ballistic missile production lines, command and control bunkers, and weapons storage depots. These facilities were all designed with the same defensive principle: bury it deep enough that American weapons cannot reach it. That principle no longer holds. Every one of these facilities is now vulnerable in ways they have never been before. Let me show you what Iran cannot do about this. They cannot shoot down what they cannot see. Their air defense networks lack the sensor capability to reliably detect and track the B-21. Even if they could detect it, their surface-to-air missiles were not designed to engage targets with this radar cross-section. They could attempt to add more radar coverage, operate radars at higher power levels, or deploy additional systems. None of that solves the fundamental problem. You cannot upgrade 1990s-era radar technology to detect 2020s-era stealth through software patches or denser coverage. They cannot harden their facilities further. There's a physical limit to how deep you can bury infrastructure while keeping it operationally useful. Facilities need ventilation, power, access for personnel, and equipment. The deeper you go, the more complex and expensive these requirements become. Iran has already pushed hardening about as far as practical engineering allows. The GBU-72 was specifically designed to defeat the hardening levels Iran has achieved. They cannot disperse their nuclear program. Uranium enrichment requires specialized facilities with precise environmental controls, security, and access to technical expertise. You cannot run a centrifuge cascade in a cave somewhere. The infrastructure is too complex. Iran could theoretically build new facilities in different locations, but that takes years and costs billions of dollars. And the moment construction begins, American intelligence satellites will identify it. They cannot negotiate from strength anymore. For years, Iran's position in nuclear negotiations rested partly on the implicit understanding that military action to destroy their nuclear program would be extremely difficult and costly. That leverage just evaporated. If negotiations fail, the United States now has a credible military option that did not exist before. This shifts the entire bargaining dynamic. Now here is where the strategic implications extend beyond the immediate military balance. The B-21 deployment is not happening in isolation. It is part of a broader recalibration of American force posture in the Middle East that is forcing every regional actor to reassess their positions. Saudi Arabia is watching this deployment very carefully. For years, Riyadh has been hedging between maintaining its security relationship with the United States and exploring normalization with Iran. The Saudis understand that if the United States can credibly threaten Iran's nuclear program without requiring Saudi cooperation or use of Saudi airspace, then Iran's ability to threaten Saudi Arabia in retaliation is diminished. This makes the Saudis more willing to align against Iranian regional ambitions. We are already seeing indications of this shift. According to sources familiar with recent discussions, Saudi officials have become notably more willing to discuss security cooperation with Israel, specifically focused on countering Iranian drone and missile capabilities. Israel is recalculating its own strike options. For years, Israeli military planners have wrestled with the question of how to strike Iranian nuclear facilities if diplomacy fails. The problem has always been operational range and penetration capability. Israeli F-35 fighters have the stealth to penetrate Iranian airspace, but lack the payload capacity to carry weapons heavy enough to destroy deep bunkers. Israeli F-15 fighters can carry heavy weapons, but lack the stealth to survive Iranian air defenses. The B-21 deployment does not solve Israel's problem directly, but it changes the strategic calculation. If the United States demonstrates willingness to use the B-21 against Iranian targets, Israel gains a powerful partner option it did not have before. Iran's regional proxies are watching their patron become vulnerable. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militia groups in Iraq and Syria, all of these organizations operate on the assumption that Iran provides a secure rear base for support, weapons, and direction. If Iran's military infrastructure becomes vulnerable to American strikes, that assumption weakens. Proxy groups will begin questioning whether aligning with Iran still offers the protection it once did. This does not mean these groups will abandon Iran overnight, but it plants seeds of doubt that can grow over time. Russia and China are taking notes. Both countries have invested heavily in their own stealth programs and advanced air defense systems. The deployment of the B-21 in a real operational environment provides both countries with intelligence about American capabilities they desperately want. We should expect increased Russian and Chinese intelligence collection efforts around any base hosting the B-21, but this also demonstrates to Moscow and Beijing that the United States possesses capabilities that their current air defense networks may not be able to counter. This has implications far beyond the Middle East for how Russia thinks about defending its own strategic facilities and how China calculates the risks of military action against Taiwan. But let me be very clear about what this deployment has not accomplished and what limitations remain, because intellectual honesty demands acknowledging the complications. The B-21 does not solve every problem the United States faces in the Middle East. Iran's asymmetric capabilities remain largely intact. The thousands of ballistic missiles, the proxy forces, the naval mines, the drone swarms, none of those are affected by the B-21 deployment. If the United States strikes Iranian nuclear facilities, Iran retains multiple options for retaliation that could be extremely costly. They could attack American forces in Iraq and Syria. They could strike Gulf state oil infrastructure. They could attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of global oil supply flows. The B-21 gives the United States a new capability, but it does not eliminate the risks of military conflict with Iran. The deployment does not guarantee American willingness to use military force. Capability is not the same as intent. The United States has possessed the capability to strike Iran for decades. The question has always been whether American leadership judges the benefits to outweigh the costs and risks. The B-21 lowers the military costs, but it does not eliminate them, and it does not resolve the political and strategic questions about whether military action advances American interests. Tehran knows this. They are betting that even with the B-21 deployed, American reluctance to trigger a regional war will continue to provide them with operating room. We do not know the full extent of the B-21's operational capabilities because the program remains highly classified. The aircraft that just deployed may be operating with constraints we are not aware of. It may require specific support infrastructure that limits how flexibly it can be used. The number of aircraft available is extremely limited. The Air Force plans to procure approximately 100 B-21s eventually, but current production has delivered maybe a half-dozen operational aircraft. You cannot run a sustained campaign with 6 aircraft. This deployment is significant, but it is not yet a fleet-level capability. Iran will adapt. They always do. Iranian military planners are not sitting passively watching their defensive advantage disappear. They will look for ways to complicate American operations. This might include dispersing high-value assets to make targeting more difficult, investing in passive defense measures that do not rely on radar detection, developing new relationships with Russia or China to acquire more advanced air defense technology, or doubling down on asymmetric capabilities that the B-21 cannot address. Adaptation takes time, but we should not assume Iran will simply accept this new vulnerability without response. Regional actors might draw conclusions the United States does not intend. If countries in the Middle East interpret the B-21 deployment as signaling American willingness to resolve the Iran nuclear issue through military force, they might take actions based on that assumption that the United States is not actually prepared to support. This creates risks of miscalculation, where regional actors trigger conflicts, expecting American military backing that may not materialize. So what has fundamentally changed? The United States now possesses a credible, militarily viable option to destroy Iran's nuclear program that did not exist before. Not a theoretical option. Not an option that requires accepting catastrophic losses. A practical option that could be executed with manageable risk. This shifts every calculation about deterrence, negotiation, and regional power dynamics. Iran's defensive investments over 4 decades have been partially negated by a single technological leap. This does not mean Iran is defenseless. It means their most critical infrastructure is now vulnerable in ways it was designed never to be. Tehran must now operate knowing that the United States can strike their deepest facilities at a time of American choosing. Regional alliances are shifting in response to this new reality. Countries that were hedging between American and Iranian influence are recalculating which patron offers more reliable security. The B-21 deployment provides a concrete demonstration of American technological superiority that words and diplomatic pressure cannot match. But here is what remains uncertain. And this is what we need to watch closely going forward. Will the United States actually use this capability, or is this primarily a deterrent deployment meant to change Iranian behavior without firing a shot? How will Iran respond once their initial assessment is complete? Will they escalate tensions to demonstrate they are not intimidated, or will they become more cautious knowing their infrastructure is vulnerable? What happens if diplomacy fails and military action becomes the only option to prevent Iranian nuclear weapons development? Does the existence of the B-21 make that decision easier, or does it just change the risk calculation without resolving the fundamental strategic questions? The next few months will be critical. We are watching for signals of Iranian adaptation, shifts in regional diplomatic alignments, and any indication of how the United States intends to leverage this new capability. This is not a completed strategic shift. This is the opening of a new phase in the long confrontation between the United States and Iran, and the rules just changed in ways Tehran never prepared for. If this analysis helped you understand why a single weapons deployment can reshape strategic calculations across an entire region, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are tracking these developments in real time, and what happens next will determine whether this deployment becomes a tool for deterrence or the opening move in a conflict that redraws the map of the Middle East. You do not want to miss what comes after.